Hey all. So I thought this time I would try a screencast. It's something that I haven't really used a lot, and I'm thinking that with, maybe us moving forward with more and more e-learning, it's something I should try. So today I'm here to tell you about discovery learning. And discovery learning is this idea that a student learns better through discovery rather than lecture or really strict teacher-run lessons. Jerome Bruner, a cognitive psychologist, is credited with coming up with the idea of discovery learning. And he's someone I actually studied in my previous presentation for cognitivism as well. I watched this video, which I'm going to show you a little bit of in a moment. It was kind of cool. I found it on YouTube. And he would go into classrooms like we see in this picture, and he would experiment with children and watch the way they learned. So as you can see in this video, it's loading. He went into school. He's working with some fifth graders here, and they're watching how pendulums interact. So it's like a physics lesson of pendulums in motion. And so when I move this pendulum, what happens to the next pendulum? And so what Jerome Bruner talks about in this clip is that this is when he sees real learning taking place. These students first experiment, come up with ideas about motion, and then they sit down as a class later in the video and they watch a video of physicists doing a similar experiment, but with like bigger, kind of more advanced strategies. And he and his colleagues explained that the students would not have understood that video if they had not done the discovery ahead of time, played around with these pendulums, and really worked through why things were moving the way they were. So this is an example of what discovery learning really is. It's this idea that students need to be hands-on, they need to be active, they need to be figuring things out by themselves with some guidance from teachers. As I was researching discovery learning, I was excited about it because this is really close to my heart. This is how I teach. So I've spoken about my American Studies class a few times already in this class. And so this is an example from that class of this podcast assignment we do during our American Dream unit. So I'm mentioning this and showing this to you now because this is an example of discovery learning. Our students are learning about the American Dream through literature and US history, and we ask them to create a series of podcast episodes where they tell us, they kind of answer our essential questions. So while we guide them with some texts and some scaffolding, which I'll talk about later, they are really doing the learning and they're bringing in their own research and they're talking together about these questions like, what is the American dream? Who can achieve it? Is it possible for everyone? And they're answering it through their podcast conversations. Okay, I decided to bring my husband, Steven. He's a math teacher at Vernon Hills.
Hello, everybody.
And the reason I'm bringing him in is I know that he also uses discovery learning in his class, so I thought he could tell me about an example that all of us could learn from. So, Steve, you want to tell us a bit about this Desmos program they use?
Sure. Desmos is a program that's a free graphing and interactive program online that I like to utilize quite a bit whenever I can because it really allows the students to investigate a lot of things. It's got a really powerful graphing calculator built into it, and it really opens up the exploration for the students. I typically like to partner the students up when they're working on something along these lines. Mm-hmm. So they're working with one other student and one computer, two students is usually my rule. So it forces them to have conversation about what I've asked them to do. In this particular lesson, I have posted, I posted 11 different slides throughout this Desmos activity, and I have the ability to pace it though, or leave it open-ended. So in this case, the first 5 slides in this activity are just like this, where there's a video attached to it, and the video is 10 to 15 seconds long. You can see this is a gentleman walking out of a door away from a building, and you can see on the video how long it takes him to travel 25 feet. And the goal at this point is, and I've done absolutely no pre-teaching of this, I want them to sketch a graph. a line graph or anything. I don't even give them any specifics. I give them the graph that's on the right hand side, and they use their Chromebooks to sketch what they think that looks like. And so you can see Siobhan's trying to make that attempt.
This is like, how many years of math have I not had at this point?
And what's great about that is my teacher screen, I'm going to try to put this up so it's visible for you guys, is I can do an overlay graph of what all of my students did. So you can see on there the one line that looks similar to what Siobhan did, and then the other lines are all sorts of guesses that my students had. Many of my students were a little bit more accurate, but a lot of that is because they were far less accurate, and they fixed things as we were having discussion. But I would see them get to a point where they made their guess as to what this looked like, and then they went back and either fixed it. I would typically have them go through 2 or 3 of these slides, and they're different videos. This one where he's walking away from the building. On the next slide, he's walking towards the building. There's a slide where he's walking away, stops, and then keeps walking away. One where he stops and ties his shoe. One where he sprints away. And so it's all about identifying some mathematical terms that aren't necessarily important for the screencast, but I get to visually see and monitor on here, and then I display, before I give any answers about what's going on, I display that overlay because it's anonymous and no students know who guessed what or did what, but it brings up an amazing conversation among the group where they have, and I can kind of just show you, by the time I got to, let's say, the 4th graph, which was, I believe, that one right there, where he stopped and tied his shoes, that was what all of my students did. They were almost identical.
So they're learning at
so
this point.
by the 4th video, they started to figure this out without any guidance from me other than opening up a new slide for them. So the investigation that they did, the conversations that they had were all self-paced, with the conversation happening afterwards when I put the overlay up and show everybody what they did. And we had great conversation about why they started at certain spots, why he ended at a certain spot, how long it took to get there, what the graph slope was, the line, the intercepts, and all of those things. Mm-hmm. So really a fascinating activity that I just started this year as I start to learn more and more about this Desmos program.
Cool. Thanks.
You bet.
So a few takeaways for me from what Steve was saying. This is obviously discovery learning because he's presenting them with real life situations, problems, and asking them to, figure out what's going on, right, and how to graph it. The other thing, I'm going to link this now to disadvantages, is that one of the major disadvantages of discovery learning, from what I said in the research, there's quite a bit of criticism about it. And one of those is because people don't, or the major one is, people don't really know what discovery learning is, or there's lots of different ways to define it. And so the issue that some teachers fall into is that they fail to guide their students. So what I heard as Steve was talking is he's guiding them. He's monitoring through this Desmos program. He's pushing out slides and activities as needed. And by the 4th time, right, his students are all graphing accurately. So he's guiding them towards accurate graphing, but he's not just, throwing them out there and letting them kind of drown, right, if we use that water analogy, without any guidance. And this is really essential to effective discovery learning. If discovery learning is not guided, in the Alfieri article, they called it enhanced discovery learning. If it's not guided and enhanced by a teacher, then it is ineffective. It is actually less effective than direct instruction. The other disadvantage that I was reading of discovery learning is that it's really not for younger children. You have to be very mindful of their zone of proximal development, as we've read about. And making sure that they are not being overstressed or overwhelmed by the task you're giving them. And often discovery learning has very high cognitive demands. It's asking students to find information, organize the information, and solve problems, and probably create a product from that. And this can overwhelm a student who's not ready. So it's not necessarily recommended for younger students because they just don't have the metacognitive and reflective skills that they need. And you really have to be mindful of who your students are and what they're capable of, and you have to guide them along the way for this to be effective. And I think that guided or enhanced discovery learning is worth it because, in my opinion, but also in looking at the advantages. The advantages of discovery learning, and I heard this from Bruner as well as the other sources that I was reading, are that students are active. So Bruner in that video I was showing you earlier was noticing that there's much less boredom. You are trying to catch those kind of middle of the road kids and keep them engaged through discovery learning. I also watched a TED Talk with Anthony Fleck, and he was a college student, and he was talking about how, though he had a wonderful high school experience, it really didn't prepare him for college. And so he talked about how in college he was expected to find his own sources, solve problems, meet with a team, come up with solutions. And he feels like more discovery learning is needed in high school in order to prepare our students for that type of experience. So that's another advantage, I think, of discovery learning, is that it prepares students to be problem solvers, critical thinkers. It teaches them to fail and try again. It can teach them the components of inquiry, so they become, people who inquire and are curious in their lives. And it definitely focuses on higher level skills and tasks, which is excellent for our students. When discovery learning is done right, as in it's guided, students also retain information much better than in a direct instruction lesson. If discovery learning is not done right, this is when we get at disadvantages again, then students will not retain information, they'll feel overwhelmed, and they will not learn. So that's why it's really important to be guiding your students with scaffolding, models, feedback, any of those types of things that can help them succeed. I'm grateful to all these sources for informing my knowledge of discovery learning, as well as to my husband for helping me with this project and explaining how he uses discovery learning in his own class. Thanks.